Blood ran down her thigh and disappeared into the dust beneath her feet. The summer heat in Red Hollow was the kind that split the ground open and made a man's thoughts wander into dark places. Leah Jennings stumbled across the open plain barefoot, her breath sharp and uneven. Her clothes were torn almost beyond recognition, clinging to her skin like reminders of what she'd just escaped. Every step sent pain up her legs, but she didn't slow down. She didn't know where she was headed. She only knew she couldn't stop. The wind pushed against her, carrying the sound of laughter from somewhere far behind. Not loud, not close, but close enough to follow her like a curse. When she reached the edge of the ranch, her strength finally gave out. Her knees buckled, and she fell hard into the dirt, the sky spinning above her. Then everything stilled at the sound of boots approaching. Samuel Briggs stepped out from the shadow of his barn, a tall, weathered man, with gray in his beard and eyes shaped by too many years under open skies. 56 years old, carved from land and loneliness. He hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. But what lay at his feet stopped him cold. The girl looked broken. Dust clung to her skin, blood streaked her legs, and bruises covered her body like a map of pain. Her hair stuck to her face, and tears had cut paths through the grime. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked. "Please," she whispered. Her hands shook as she clutched what was left of her clothes, pulling them tight as if they were the only thing holding her together. "Help me." Samuel had seen death before. He'd watched men bleed out in the dirt, and horses fall with bullets still warm in them. But this wasn't the same. This was something deeper. This was what a soul looked like when it had been torn apart. He stood there a moment longer than he meant to, then spoke quietly. "Come inside." The cabin smelled of old wood, coffee, and tobacco soaked deep into the walls. Samuel filled a basin with water, took a clean rag, and uncorked a bottle of whiskey. The sharp smell filled the room as he cleaned her wounds slowly, carefully, as if rushing might break her all over again. She didn't cry, she didn't scream. She just stared at the floor, silent and shaking. When he asked her name, she whispered it. He nodded and asked nothing more. Outside, the wind moaned through the fence line. Inside, only the ticking of a clock filled the space. Samuel looked at her again and felt something twist in his chest. She reminded him of his sister Mary. 16 years old when soldiers passed through the valley. He'd been away that night. When he returned, she was gone. That guilt had never left him. And now, looking at this girl, the same anger rose again. But this time, he wasn't walking away. The sun was sinking low and Samuel stepped onto the porch. The sky burned orange and red, the color of old scars. Inside, Leah slept at last, exhaustion finally claiming her. Samuel watched the horizon in silence, the way a man watches trouble long before it arrives. For years he had chosen to live quiet, no visitors, no attachments, no trouble. But tonight, trouble had walked through his door and left blood on his floor, and for reasons he didn't yet understand, it felt like it belonged there. When he went back inside, Leah stirred. Her voice was soft, rough from thirst and fear. She told him she hadn't meant to cause him harm. He shook his head and poured 2 cups of coffee, sliding one across the table. Steam rose between them, thin and fragile. He asked who had done this to her. She hesitated, fingers tightening around the cup. Then she told him. The mayor's sons. They said her father owed them money. Her father had been dead for nearly a month. Fever had taken him. They came anyway. Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd known men like that all his life. Men who thought money made them untouchable. Men who believed power gave them the right to hurt others. She told him no one in this town ever paid for what they did. Samuel stared into the fire, remembering soldiers, remembering Mary, remembering all the times he'd done nothing. That was the part that still burned the worst. He told her she could stay. Her eyes widened. She asked if he wasn't afraid they'd come looking for her. Samuel looked toward the door. He said they could come if they wanted. Silence settled between them, heavy but not empty. She said she didn't want to hide forever. Samuel nodded. He told her she wouldn't. He reached for the rifle on the wall, then stopped. Instead, he set it on the table. The old iron looked right at home there. Outside, coyotes howled somewhere deep in the valley. Inside, Samuel Briggs felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. Later that night the sound came. Hoofbeats. Slow, steady, growing closer. Samuel knew that sound well. Dust rose in the distance. 6 riders. 3 of them were the mayor's sons. The others were hired guns. Leah appeared at the stairs, her eyes wide. She said they'd found her. Samuel told her to go to the loft and not make a sound. She begged him not to do something foolish. He gave a tired half-smile and said it was already too late. He stepped onto the porch as the riders stopped short. Thomas Berkeley smiled without warmth and asked about a young woman. Samuel said he hadn't seen her. The sheriff asked to look around. Samuel asked for a warrant. When none came, he told them a man's land was his castle. The wind carried the smell of sweat and gun oil. After a long moment, Thomas turned his horse. He promised they'd be back. Samuel said he'd be right there. Inside, Leah sat shaking on the bed. She told Samuel they'd called her a thief, that her father had been an honest man. Samuel told her the truth. They were scared of losing the power they'd bought with money and lies. Fear made men reckless. Thunder rolled far off in the distance. Not rain, but something worse. She leaned forward and asked what if they didn't. Wait. What if they went after the truth? She told him about the bank records, the fake loans, the names written down. Samuel frowned. Breaking into a bank meant hanging, she said. So did what they'd done to her. Her voice was quiet but firm. When he looked at her eyes, he saw something new. Not fear. Resolve. By midnight, rain had turned the dirt streets into mud. The bank stood dark and silent. They moved carefully, shadows slipping through the night. Inside, the air was stale. Leah went straight to the files, her hands moving fast, confident. Names filled the pages. False debts. Forged signatures. Lives ruined on paper. Samuel muttered that this wasn't just corruption. It was rot all the way down. Bootsteps sounded at the front door. Voices echoed through the lobby. Samuel blew out the lantern and grabbed her hand. The sheriff's voice cut through the dark. Samuel tightened his grip on the rifle. There would be no talking this time. Whatever happened next would decide everything. Morning came slow over Red Hollow. Smoke rose from the remains of the bank. Days passed before the truth reached Denver. When it did, federal marshals came riding hard. By noon, chains filled the town. The mayor's sons, the sheriff, everyone tied to the corruption. Samuel and Leah watched from the hill. He told her father would have been proud. Weeks later, the general store was returned to her. Samuel said she could rebuild it. She said she might use it to help others instead. He smiled, quiet and proud. People still talk about that night. Some call it justice, some call it fate. The truth was simpler. It was a choice. 2 people who refused to stay silent. Sometimes one act of courage is enough to change an entire town.